Welcome to Big Report on Breakfast Extra. This hour, we turn to the growing calls for electoral reforms in Nigeria as the country looks towards 2027. At a dialogue on the National Action Plan for Electoral Reforms convened by the Abuja School of Social and Political Thought, stakeholders argued that the Independent National Electoral Commission needs more than tinkering. It needs a complete overhaul. They point to persistent flaws in election management, credibility concerns, and weak institutional independence as reasons why Nigeria must revisit long-standing proposals.
Now, one of the key recommendations is to revisit the Justice Uwais Electoral Reform Report, which has sat on the shelf for years. Among its core proposals is changing the way the INEC Chairman is appointed. Stakeholders insist the process must be shielded from executive control to guarantee neutrality and public trust. The message is clear. If Nigeria is to deliver credible elections in 2027, reforms cannot wait until the eve of the polls. So, joining us now are two voices central to the conversation: Segun Sopitan, Chairman of the Accountability, Candour Transparency Network, and Dr. Sam Amadi, Executive Director of the Abuja School of Social and Political Thoughts.
Welcome, gentlemen.
Welcome, gentlemen.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
So, Mr. Sopitan, let me start with you. Why is the call for electoral reform resurfacing so strongly now, barely 2 years after the 2023 elections?
Thanks. I think the reason for that, you could argue, is self-evident. It's the fact that governance is not working for people. The conversations around governance have been reverberating, in the national conversation for the last 2 years. It's been extremely controversial. The actions of both at the national and the subnational level of our political appointees have shown clearly that the interest of the people perhaps is not necessarily at the forefront of their minds and at the forefront of their intentions. And that has brought about the conversation about, what can the people do about this? And, every time that you have that conversation, it's going to dovetail back to elections. It's going to dovetail back to the leadership selection process. It's going to dovetail back to the fact that people seem to believe that they can't control that narrative. They really don't have too much of a say in who becomes their president, who becomes their governor, who becomes, the National Assembly members and the State House of Assembly members. So invariably, you come back to the issue of INEC. What needs to be done to ensure that politicians know and understand that if they do not do well in office, that they will lose elections. At the moment, that appears not to be the case. I don't think too many politicians believe that they must do well to win the next election. They know what they need to do to win the next election, but I don't think that one of the things that they think they need to do is to deliver good governance. So if you have that kind of situation, then obviously people are going to continue to talk about INEC, and electoral reforms.
Okay, so Dr. Amadi, let me come to you. As the convener of the Abuja School Dialogue, what was your central concern driving this latest push for reform?
Well, thank you for having me. I think two critical issues. One is the fact that clearly, without electoral reform in some direction, Nigeria has been having electoral reform almost every electoral cycle, but maybe not hitting the point. So we think that if we don't do, maybe 3-4 reforms that are critical, you further damage the credibility of the election, and it's becoming very expensive to have bad elections. We see what's going on in Mali, in Burkina Faso, across West Africa. And so if you look at the latest Quality of Democracy rating for Nigeria, we've moved from a hybrid democracy to electoral autocracy. So our elections are becoming not just, flawed, as it was said in 2007 by the Supreme Court, but now almost no elections. And the implication for that, again, you see what's happening with the Supreme Court and others. So the implication is that we might lose this democracy if we don't fix election. That does not mean that you fix election, you fix the other side of democracy. Now, the second driving force here is that the reforms have not been based on what we call institutional and strategic approach. And that starts with identifying what is the real problem. So what Abuja School did, working with the Project Committee of NLC, TUC, and the all IPAC, is to say, if you look at election, 23 was ought to be a good election, but there are three missing pieces. One was a so-called vagueness around electoral transmission, real-time electoral transmission. So we think that it's important to, because of Nigerian jurisprudence is so incoherent, make it clear, and then let it become the fact that once you don't do that, results are nullified. So the collection officer has no right to collect any result not so uploaded publicly, and secondly, the courts are bound to discontinue them. So that you have to constrain the judicial aspect and the administrative aspect. And the second aspect is very critical. Let's talk about appointment of INEC commissioners. Yes, the best thing would be to move away from presidential power. But it's going to be difficult for the president to concede this kind of parliament. So we propose an additional safeguard, which is even if the president keeps appointing, any person who has held party office, who has had party membership, and who have been appointed by president or a governor serving in Nigeria in the last 5 years before appointment cannot be appointed. And anybody appointed, would no longer participate in party management, will not hold appointive office, elected office in Nigeria for the next 4 years. So the idea is very simple: is to create regulatory, disconnect conflict of interest. So we saw a APC chairman was formerly INEC National Commissioner of State REC. And then we see in the case of Abia former governor, who was REC in Abia, where not just was there, later became his chief of staff and deputy governor and became governor. So that recycling chair, you reduce the partisanship, even if the president appoints. The president has to appoint from a limited, set of people who have not obviously shown any political affiliation or appointment. For now, for example, some REC are part of we are formerly commissioner with Ababio. One was commissioner or SA with Wike. So even if the president appoints, let them appoint from a carefully designed group of persons who are not evidently partisan.
All right, Dr. Sam.
And again, very critical. The idea that electoral, only people who won election can challenge the election. We said, no, you should create the right of groups and voters to challenge the election. And you can nullify election, not because I should have won or results are proven. If you don't follow the electoral rule, the judicial approach should be to nullify election, because you're going to create an incentive structure against rigging. If people know that they spend 2 billion, 5 billion, and the election, the victory can be nullified, then they would no longer, spend those funds to rig elections. So these are some of the fundamental
Dr. Amadi,
that are different from what we've done in the past. Yeah.
Dr. Amadi, now I hear what you're saying, and it's very clear. You're trying to say, okay, let's remove any or let's streamline the process when it comes to people who are being elected for governance or for office. However, I'm wondering how much consideration is being given to the greater mass of Nigerians, and I'm talking about the youth population. And seeing that you are the executive director of the Abuja School of Social and Political Thought, this is actually a very interesting question for you, as well as Mr. Sopitan here. Let's take a look at Nepal. Nepal only just had a new prime minister installed. She was elected, Susila Kaki, if I'm not mistaken. Now, it's not her being appointed or selected that is the main thing here. It's the method with which she was selected. And it was championed by a youth-led movement. And the way she was elected, or I keep saying elected, selected, was over social media on an app that stripped away any of these very critical issues that you've just spoken about. Now, when we're talking about reform, my question is, how much consideration is given to the young population, the people who are supposed to be the ones who are governed, the people whom it bites the hardest? They're the ones who are supposed to be electing eventually. While you're streamlining the process for the officers themselves, how much consideration are they getting in all of this reform? I'm going to ask both of you that question, but first let's start with you, Dr. Amadi.
Okay, first, good question. Look, The Abuja schools premises, there are two ways we can make this change. One is a revolutionary way, which is what, quote unquote, and oftentimes violent, forget what happens after. Nigeria's dynamics, perhaps does not make that very attractive. We are a divided people. Anytime issues come up, this and other. But let's leave that. So yes, if you have a revolutionary context in which the Arab Spring, we've seen several cases like that, you successfully remove the status quo, then you create a change. You can even use Voice Populi, you can use Twitter Space to elect somebody. But we are saying the other alternative for this unscripted, unpredictable, and sometimes ungovernable revolutionary process is the what we call electoral revolution. And then people coming here, for example, part of what we are saying is that why do you have to have a process where elections finish at the polling unit and then you go to collection centers? No, just right there, where the young people are there, it's uploaded a publicly available platform where every young person with his phone can calculate and know who has won. So we don't have the nicety of waiting for a so-called professor to declare results. Results can now be officially released by INEC, but the real results have been known. Media houses, like you can call it. So this process allows young people to play key role because one, they are the demographic that makes the difference in terms of voting. Two, you restore back their trust that this peaceful process for power transition works, because when the young people vote and they see the result and it's uploaded to a publicly available portal that they can log in and do the back of envelope calculation and know that this constituency, this person has won, and the result stands and it's not nullified by INEC during collection, and the courts themselves are not going to allow anybody to nullify that.
All right now, Dr. Amadi.
Young people will restore back confidence in the democracy. So this works for the young people, actually.
All right then, Dr. Amadi. Mr. Sopitan, what's your take on that?
Well, there are some points that Dr. Amadi made earlier when he spoke earlier, speaking about the electoral process, streamlining appointment processes to ensure that we have gatherings that prevent partisanship of electoral officers. And the question you ask is then turning the searchlight on the people. And I think that one of the things that we have to understand is that those changes that he spoke about invariably are designed to boost confidence in the process. And that is pretty much dead in Nigeria today. And that is very dangerous. So talking about the people, talking about the young Gen Z, the people who are turning 18 in the next 2 years and who will perhaps want to, be excited about being able to exercise the franchise, but who are not because of the debacle that they've seen play out in front of them. They hear their fathers, their mothers and their uncles talk about the electoral process, and they hear the disdain, in the voice and in the conversation. If we do not fix the process and reverse this apathy, where you have less than 30%, less than 22% in some instances of the registered voters deciding who is going to govern the majority of the people, then you are asking for chaos. It's only a matter of time before the Nepal scenario plays out. I agree with Dr. Amadi that maybe, our social construct may not necessarily allow for that, but how long will that be? It's a matter of time before some sort of tipping point is reached and there is chaos. So we need to make sure that the electoral process is transparent enough to convince the average ordinary Nigerian, especially the young ones, that their votes will count and will be counted, and that those votes will determine the person that emerges as their leader. If that is not done, then Nepal is only waiting down the line. Every time that we have electoral reforms that are cosmetic and superficial, we're kicking the can down the road, and it's only a matter of time before that can trips us off. So I think that we have to pay very serious importance, and I'm talking especially about our leaders, if we can call them that, to understand that if they do not do something about, this very terrible apathy that we have today, especially amongst young people, it's only a matter of time before they enter the streets and take matters into their own hands. So it's enlightening self-interest, for our politicians today to understand that we've got to fix the system to avoid, having 20% or 22% of voting population determining the outcomes of the elections. And I also think that very quickly, one of the changes that I think we also need to make, perhaps, Dr. Amadi, I'm suggesting this to you, since you are leading the process, is to amend our electoral laws to prevent a winner emerging who has not won the majority of votes cast. You know, so the standard practice in most jurisdictions is no matter what happens, you must win more than 50% of total votes cast. So if you have 3 forerunners, like we had in 2023 elections, where the winner, eventual winner, won about 36% of total votes, and then the runner-up won about 32%, and the top place person won about 30-something%, you have a runner-up. So we need to, right now, our electoral law and the constitution does not require a runoff. All it wants is a simple majority. And the condition for a runoff does not include you needing to win 50% of votes cast. I think that is a fundamental defect in our electoral law and in the constitution that has to be fixed. You know, so if we take care of those things, take care of selection process for INEC, you know, of the electoral officials generally, then maybe we will begin to see the apathy reversed, and then we can, you know, start walking back away from the precipice.
Mr. Sopitan,
as we speak today, we are on the precipice.
Now, Mr. Sopitan, very interesting inclusion there regarding the runoff. I think I'm going to ask Dr. Amadi something on that ground in just a bit, but Queen has a question for you still.
So, Mr. Segun, given that the Nepal's Gen Z population are right in front of the recent protests, and we see that, you know, they're asking for accountability and transparency, how can we incorporate that in our electoral reform, you know, to design something specific for the younger demographic?
I think there are 2 things that will come. One would be to find a way to provide a feedback mechanism that, if you like, if possible, that is legislated, you know, that compels the elected officials to listen to the people, especially the young ones. You know, you just ask this, and I'm just thinking of the cost. You know, so that will be one. Find a way to ensure that their voice actually counts and they do get a voice. So one of the ways that is done in other jurisdictions is to have some sort of affirmative action or representative rules that ensure that a certain number of young people are given access to elected offices and so on and so forth. Maybe that could help. But I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is that these Gen Zs are online all the time. Their phones are literally glued to their hands, and you can't get them to look up. Right? So how do we ensure that the information that they're getting off those devices are bits and pieces of information that reinforces their belief in the process, that reinforces confirms that their voice counts and that their votes will count. You know, for me, I think that is the most important thing. If once they understand and they believe that if they go out to cast a vote, they can get out that very useless local government chairman, pardon the word, or that's useless House of Assembly member or National Assembly member, or that they can impeach. You know, they can threaten their legislators to impeach a governor, maybe even impeach a president. Then you will have the attention of the Gen Z. But of course, we know we're very, very, very long way off from those types of things in Nigeria as we speak. But I tell you, those types of structures that returns power into the hands of the people will do a lot to win the Gen Zs over, because these guys, you know, they don't think the way you and I think. They're a bit more irreverent. They don't understand that rules apply to them. They will keep asking you why. You know, so I think that it's very crucial that we begin to look for ways to incorporate them.
Mr. Sopitan, I don't know about that comparison there, how they think between us, because I'm not sure if I think Queen might be Gen Z.
I am not.
But Mr. Amadi, Dr. Amadi, let me come to you, piggybacking off of something that Mr. Sopitan mentioned. Runoffs can be destabilizing. They can be very divisive. So in the take on reforming our electoral process, what design, what electoral design could there be? Could you come up with that will ensure that we don't have these in the first place? I mean, runoffs, and however that would ensure that whoever the winner is, there's still a very broad margin of legitimacy when it comes to the winner.
Well, there have been debates around what they call difference between proportional representation and first past the post. The argument has been that maybe we should have proportional representation, which is the idea that you get, even the parliament or the legislature, you get to have seats assigned to you based on performance. That's number one. So that there's no winner takes all, and it's much more inclusive. And again, raising the threshold. Now, what our constitution has done is informed by our constitutional history, which is that we are a country where we concern about ethnic and other differences. And so the design of the constitution says to be Nigerian president, you have to achieve two conditions. One, spread. So even if you have 60% of the votes, I didn't have spread two-thirds of, 25% of two-third states, you are not going to be a president. So that condition, I think, answers to our history. So if you look at, if there are free and fair election and somebody gets 25% in two-thirds of Nigerian states, the chances is that he has gained legitimate 25%, 1/4 of the various ethnic religious tendencies in the country. Again, and you must only have simple majority, which is answer to the question whether people prefer you more. So those two square, for example, the US focuses on the Electoral College, which is their own approximation of spread, but you might not have the highest vote. So the leader carries some illegitimacy that more people preferred X than Y, but Y had one more Electoral College. In many cases, some of that victory would be something like 220,000 votes. We saw in Georgia, it could be something very minimal. So I think that what we need to do, I think the way we want to elect our president is actually good. It gives it a broad mandate. But what is missing is that the electoral system, you see, two things are involved. One is election is a voting to make it credible and accurate. Two, and that means the election becomes competitive because people can choose to vote out who they don't want. Two is to make electoral system create legitimacy, broader legitimacy by being more inclusive. And so if we do proportional representation, number one, or raise the threshold so that even if you get to third of the votes, you also have to have 60% or more of the vote, like I said. In which case, if you don't have it, you enter into alliance to make up that vote with somebody else who has won. We saw an alliance in the Second Republic between MPN and NPP, even though it later floundered. But at least we saw where two parties, one major, one minor, came together and gave some ministerial position to others. So I think the idea of a more inclusive, a more politically legitimate electoral system is a good one. But let's first solve the problem of a credible election. Because if at the end of the day, it doesn't matter the threshold, people rig themselves to get that threshold, then it's worse than nothing. The real savior for democracy in Nigeria, and by democracy, I mean the stability of other transition of power. Let's forget about the economic and political production of goods and services and good governance. That requires more dynamics. But you have to have a competitive electoral system. And what underlies it is the possibility that the person in power can lose power, vote that, and go home peacefully like we saw in 2015. And what makes that possible is that people can vote free. Their vote is counted accurately, fair. And a system of announcing the results and a system of adjudicating disputes over results are just and fair. So we talk about free, fair election. That's what all democracy is about. But that's one critical piece that allows us to see that it's competitive and therefore the vote counts. So I agree with you. But first, let's get the votes to count.
All right. Dr. Amadi, Mr. Sopitan, thank you very much, gentlemen, for giving us such a very interesting conversation here for our first big story on Breakfast Extra. We'll continue to follow this process, and we hope, like we have asked, that the Gen Z are incorporated into all of these reforms that we're speaking about come 2027. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we go on a quick break. We've got another fiery conversation and education lined up for this hour. Do stay with us.